When the spirit begins to stir within, it doesn't do so gently. It doesn't send you flowers or whisper sweet promises of peace. Instead, it arrives like a storm, unannounced, unapologetic, and absolutely necessary. This is the part of the awakening most people fear, because it doesn't feel like enlightenment. It feels like disruption. Everything you once believed in starts to wobble. The job that once gave you purpose starts to feel like a cage. The relationships you clung to begin to fall apart. Even your daily routines, what you eat, how you speak, the music you enjoy, start to feel foreign. It's not madness, it's realignment. Your soul is beginning to show you what no longer serves the truth or who you really are. Think of your life like a house that has been decorated based on someone else's taste. Over the years, you accepted the furniture, the colors, the pictures on the wall, not because you loved them, but because you were told that's how a house should look. But suddenly, something inside you clicks. You look around and realize none of this feels like home. That moment of clarity, that discomfort, that itch to tear it all down, that's the beginning of your spiritual awakening. But here's the part many people struggle with. The demolition comes before the rebuild, and most people can't stand the dust. Disruption is not punishment. It is sacred. It is purposeful. It is the divine's way of clearing the old, so the new can be built with intention. But humans are creatures of habit. We cling to the familiar even when it makes us miserable. We stay in relationships that drain us because they're familiar. We work jobs that kill our creativity because they're secure. We follow beliefs that don't resonate anymore because questioning them feels like betrayal. But what if that discomfort is actually your inner self calling you home? Let me tell you a simple story. There was a man who had a beautiful tree in his backyard. It was large, leafy, and had been there since before he moved into the house. But over the years, it stopped bearing fruit. The leaves turned brown, yet he kept watering it, kept hoping it would come back to life. One day, a gardener told him, "This tree is dead. It's stealing nutrients from the soil. Cut it down, and you'll make space for something new to grow." The man resisted. The tree was part of his view, part of his memory, part of what he thought made his home complete. But eventually he agreed. He cut it down. And in the empty space that followed, the soil healed. New plants grew. Fresh beauty emerged. That is what your soul does during a spiritual awakening. It removes the dead trees in your life, the beliefs, relationships, habits, and identities that are no longer alive. But instead of trusting the process, most people panic. They look at the empty space and feel fear, not faith. They try to replant what was just removed. They rebuild what was meant to be cleared. And that's why they don't survive their awakening. Not because the process failed them, but because they couldn't trust the divine in the discomfort. You have to understand, real growth is messy. It's not a polished Instagram quote. It's crying on the floor at midnight, not because you're weak, but because your old self is dissolving. It's questioning everything you once swore was true. It's walking away from what's easy to walk toward what's right. And that's not glamorous, but it is glorious. The greatest tragedy isn't losing things during your awakening. It's going back to what broke you just because it's familiar. Some people will lose everything in the process: friends, jobs, even their sense of identity. But the ones who survive are the ones who understand this one truth. When your soul starts to wake up, your world must fall apart first, not to hurt you, but to make room for the person you were always meant to be. In daily life, this shows up in countless subtle ways. The friend you used to call every day suddenly drains you with gossip. That's your soul nudging you toward more nourishing connections. The career you once fought for now feels pointless. That's your calling beginning to rise. You may even start waking up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, not from anxiety, but from alignment knocking on the door. Don't ignore these signs. Don't run back to sleep. Stay awake. Yes, it's uncomfortable, but comfort never changed anyone's life. Fire always comes before gold. And just like gold must be purified in intense heat, your soul must be refined through divine disruption. So if everything in your life is shaking, take a deep breath and say, "Thank you." You are not being destroyed, you are being designed. And the more you resist the process, the longer it takes. But if you can embrace the mess, if you can see the pain as part of the plan, you will come out on the other side not just awake, but alive. Authentically, completely, purposefully alive. There is a sacred silence that follows the storm of awakening, a space where everything seems still, yet inside, a transformation is occurring so deep that words often fail to describe it. This silence isn't just the absence of noise, it's the divine invitation to listen. Not to the outside world, but to the voice within you that you've ignored for too long. The reason most people never survive their spiritual awakening is because they fight this stillness. They run from isolation. They try to fill the quiet with distractions, calls, noise, busy schedules, anything that stops them from hearing their soul speak. But if only they understood, this isolation is not abandonment, it is alignment. It is not emptiness, it is preparation. True awakening doesn't happen in crowds. It doesn't happen in applause or even in the validation of others. It happens when you are alone with yourself, when there's no one left to impress, when your achievements no longer comfort you, when you strip away every label you've worn and sit quietly with the rawness of who you are. That space is holy. It's the cocoon phase of your transformation. And just like a caterpillar must isolate in darkness before it becomes a butterfly, your spirit also needs stillness to evolve. But the problem is, most people resist this part. We are conditioned to believe that solitude is something negative. We've been taught that being alone means being unloved, unwanted, or unsuccessful. So the moment awakening pulls us away from the crowd, we panic. We feel like we're failing. But in truth, this separation is divine strategy. It's the Creator pulling you aside to reveal who you are without the noise, without the masks, without the roles you've been playing for others. Imagine this. You've been dancing on a stage for years, wearing costume after costume, performing role after role. You've gotten so used to the applause that you began to think the costume was you. But then, one day, the curtains close. the audience disappears, and you're left alone in the dressing room, looking at yourself in the mirror, not in makeup, not in costume, but as you are. That moment is jarring. It feels lonely. But it's also the first time in years you get to meet the real you. That's what spiritual isolation does. It strips away the roles you've performed. It separates you from people and patterns that don't match your truth. And while it feels painful, it's purposeful. Because in that stillness, something extraordinary begins to happen. You start to hear the voice of your inner self, the voice you silenced for years under the weight of expectations, the voice that told you to rest, but you pushed through, the voice that told you something didn't feel right, but you ignored it to keep peace. That voice is your divine compass, and it only grows louder when the world grows quieter. One of the greatest daily examples of this comes in our modern obsession with being constantly connected. Look around. Every moment of silence is quickly filled with a phone, a screen, a scroll. We wake up and immediately check messages. We eat meals while watching videos. We walk while listening to podcasts. We cannot sit in silence for more than a few seconds without feeling uncomfortable. And yet we say we want clarity. We want peace. We want to hear from God, from our higher self, from something greater. But how can we expect divine guidance when we never pause long enough to listen? Silence isn't empty. It's full of answers. Isolation isn't punishment. It's where direction is born. Think of how the greatest inventions, the most profound books, the most powerful revelations almost always came from solitude. Great thinkers didn't find clarity in chaos. They stepped away. They walked alone. They tuned in. And that is exactly what awakening demands of you. Not because you are being abandoned, but because you are being refined. The challenge is that this isolation can feel endless. Days turn into weeks where no one seems to understand you. Old friends drift away. You find it hard to explain your new thoughts, your new energy. You may even feel disconnected from the version of yourself you used to be. And that's okay. That disconnection is necessary. You are being unplugged from a system that no longer serves your soul. And in that unplugging, you may feel alone, but you are never without purpose. You see, seeds don't grow in the spotlight. They grow underground, in darkness, in silence. Your spiritual awakening is doing the same. It's planting you in isolation so your roots can deepen, so your foundation becomes strong. So when you do rise again, it won't be as a version of yourself that pleases others. It will be as your highest self, grounded in truth, aligned with purpose, and led by something greater than the opinions of the world. So don't fear the silence. Don't rush the isolation. Don't try to run back to noise just because the quiet feels foreign. Stay in it. Breathe through it. Trust that this sacred pause is not the end of your story. It's the place where the next chapter is being written in the language of truth, in the voice of the divine, in the stillness of your becoming. We live in a world that glorifies feelings. We're told to follow our heart, do what feels right, and trust our emotions. And while emotions are real, they are not always true. They change with the weather, with our mood, with the words of others. But spiritual awakening is not a feeling. It is a responsibility, a deep, unshakable calling to align your entire life with truth, even when it doesn't feel good, even when it's uncomfortable, even when no one else understands it. This is why most people don't survive their spiritual awakening, because they enter it expecting peace, but are given purpose. They want comfort, but are handed calling, and calling demands everything. When you awaken spiritually, you begin to see clearly, not through your eyes, but through your soul. The illusions fall away. You realize that much of what you've built your life upon was not truth. It was tradition, habit, fear, or expectation. And now, as your inner eyes open, you can't unsee what you've seen. You can't go back to the version of you that accepted less, stayed silent, played small. But with that clarity comes responsibility. You now know, you now see, and once you know, you are accountable. You're no longer allowed to pretend. Awakening demands you take ownership of your life. Think about a lighthouse. It doesn't exist for itself. It exists to guide others through storms. It doesn't flicker depending on how it feels. It stands firm because it's built on rock. In the same way, once you awaken, you're no longer just living for yourself. You become a light. You're no longer allowed to live by convenience. You live by conviction. This is a weight, but it is also a gift. Every day you'll face choices, easy ones and hard ones, and before awakening, you may have chosen based on what felt good, what brought quick rewards, or what made you look successful. But now every decision becomes sacred. You begin asking, is this aligned with truth? Not, does this make me money? Or, will people like me more? Or, does this make me look powerful? You begin measuring your life not by gain, but by growth. And growth requires sacrifice. Let me give you an example from real life. Imagine someone working in a high-paying corporate job. From the outside, they have everything: status, salary, stability. But every day, they feel more disconnected. They feel the weight of unspoken truth on their chest. Their soul whispers, "This isn't you anymore." And in their awakening, they realize their purpose lies in something else. Maybe teaching, creating, healing, or serving. But to follow that purpose, they must leave the comfort, face judgment, start over, lose money, begin again. This is the responsibility of awakening. To obey the inner voice, even when it costs you something on the outside. And yet, this is where true power is born. Because nothing in this world can compete with a person who is walking in alignment with their spirit. They move differently. They speak with clarity. Their presence carries weight. Not because they're loud, but because they're true, and people feel that. Truth, after all, doesn't need to be explained. It radiates. The mistake many make is thinking awakening is just about a spiritual experience, some mystical moment, some goosebump encounter. But no, awakening is about discipline. It's about daily choices that honor your soul. It's about refusing to betray yourself in small ways. It's about walking away from gossip because your spirit doesn't want to be polluted. It's about choosing honesty over manipulation. It's about saying no to things that tempt your ego but starve your essence. That responsibility can feel heavy. You'll have days where you want to go back. where you miss the simplicity of ignorance. But every time you consider retreating, you'll hear your spirit whisper, "We've come too far to turn around now." That voice will remind you that the cost of betraying your soul is far greater than the cost of losing comfort. One of the most inspiring truths about responsibility in awakening is that it multiplies your influence. When you align your life with purpose, people around you begin to shift